Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Other Side Podcast. Little bit of housekeeping before we get into this. This episode is going to be about true Kentucky ghost stories, which I will get into here in a second. If you're watching this on YouTube and you're wondering, hey, last week I got an actual video, the Baker Mayfield and Aaron Rodgers UFO video. Why is this just audio? What I'm gonna try to do on this podcast show, The Other Side, whatever you want to consider it, is 1 week I'm gonna try to do more of a podcast episode. It's gonna be longer, it's gonna be more audio based. The video's not gonna have that much editing on it. And then the next week, what I'm going to do is make a video. It can be a deep dive into one specific topic, and I'm going to make an actual YouTube video and upload it. And I'm going to try my best to make sure that that video translates to an audio only version, so that way I can post it as a podcast as well for people who are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any other podcast platform I'm on. I enjoy editing, but I also don't have all of the time in the world to edit a new video every week. But there's so much weird stuff I'd like to talk about, which is why I'm trying to do this. I have a full-time job. I'm also a full-time student. I'm in college. I already have my bachelor's degree, and I decided I'm going to punish myself with more school. So that's where I'm at right now. But before I start, I wanted to give a very heartfelt thank you to 3 different groups of individuals. The first one, I really want to say thank you to For the Booze. Megan, Steve, you all have been incredibly nice since I first met you all. I started out as a fan when you all first started, found you through Twitter. And you all have been incredibly helpful. I asked for advice, and I truly appreciate all the help you gave me. Same thing with Believing the Bizarre. I asked their permission for my last video with Baker Mayfield if I could use a clip from their podcast. They were incredibly helpful. Gave me advice, reviewed my video, gave me some pointers. They're incredibly nice people on the podcast and even behind it in real life. So thank you all for your help. And I would also like to thank the podcast that I have listened to longer than any other podcast, which is the Crackpot Podcast. Tim and Zach are incredible people. They're very helpful, very nice, very kind people behind their podcast as well. I sent them the generic, hey, I'm a huge fan. I've listened to you for a while. You all are one of my inspirations messages. Can you look at this and tell me if it's garbage? And they sent me essentially a Harry Potter novel, breaking it down, helping me. And I truly appreciate their help. I will link Believing the Bizarre, For the Booze, and Crackpot down in the comments or description of this video. Or if you're listening to it in an audio format, it'll be linked in the description. Thank you all again. I truly appreciate it. And let's get into some true Kentucky ghost stories. Gonna kind of bounce off of this next week because we're going to be talking about the haunted Boone Tavern in Berea, Kentucky. But that is going to be more of a video. So be on the lookout for that as well. And let's get into it. So all of the stories in this, they were documented by folklorist from Western Kentucky University. His name's William Lynwood Montell. Unfortunately, he passed away fairly recently, and I was kind of heartbroken when I found that out. My friend Zach, he just started at Western Kentucky maybe a year, 2 years ago, and I was like, hey, find this guy. Can you get his autograph for me? I've read his books growing up. If you remember the Scholastic Book Fair, I'd go there and try to get as many books as I could because they were made by the University Press for Western Kentucky. So we got a lot of his books in our book fairs. And unfortunately, he passed away, but he did excellent research. These books, they're just collections of stories that he gathered across Kentucky. And I'm going to be reading some of the spookier ones, some of the ones that, especially from my childhood, kept me up at night. So I hope you all enjoy. And again, I'll tell you the books real quick. It's Ghost Across Kentucky, which is one of his earlier books. I've basically read it until it's fallen apart, and I need to get another one. It's from the year 2000. That's how old that book is. And the other book that I will be looking at is called Haunted Houses and Family Ghost of Kentucky. I got this one fairly recently, so this is a new book for me, and it's from 2001. Most of these stories, they were collected in like the 1990s, 1980s, and the people he talked to were born and raised in Kentucky, so a lot of the language is Appalachian dialect. So I will try to keep as close to the source material as possible. I might change a few words here and there because that's just how I read. So please excuse me. I try to hide my very redneck accent, especially now that I live in Cincinnati. So if that does come out when I'm reading this, I'm sorry, and I hope you all enjoy. This first story comes from Chapter 8 of Ghost Across Kentucky. The chapter is called Ghost of Persons Accidentally Killed. And this is Penny's Spirit Seen at a High School. It all started one dark evening. The janitor at this high school, located here in central Kentucky, was sweeping the dirty floors. All of the people had been out of the building for hours, and no one was in sight except Carl, who was the janitor, and his friend. As Carl turned to go to the back of the room he was cleaning, he saw a girl sitting there at a desk, alone. He asked her what she was doing and told her that she should go home. The girl never said a word to him, yet she sat there. When Carl started toward the back of the room, the girl slowly disappeared right in front of him. The next day, Carl told of his adventure the previous night. He was asked to pick out the girl in the yearbook. He carefully searched for her, and after finally locating her picture, he and the others realized that she had been in a car wreck and died a few weeks back. What happened was her and her best friend had skipped school to go see their boyfriends several miles away. On the way there, the driver lost control of the car and ran off the road. Although the driver wasn't killed, the other girl, whom we call Penny, died. Penny was greatly upset at the one who was driving. That's why we believe she appeared at the school. The next day after Penny had come back, the word alive was found written on the blackboard in the schoolroom where Penny's spirit had been seen. The unusual thing about the word was that it was written backward on the blackboard, as if someone had written it from the other side. The school had been locked all night, and no one knows how anyone could have got in to write on the blackboard. In the next few weeks, people were aroused by all the strange happenings that were going on there at the school. The yearbook staff had a deadline to meet, but they weren't quite finished at that point. They had all gotten together in the English room after school to finish their scheduled work. It was late, and the school and office doors had been locked for some time. All of a sudden, the intercom came on, and someone's voice called Penny to the office. The office, of course, was locked, and nobody around had the key to get in there. Little things happened on and off. Teachers would get to school in the mornings and their classrooms would be rearranged. Things also started to disappear. A couple of people also claimed to have seen Penny, which they could have never done because she had passed away at that point. About a month after Carl had seen Penny, he was also killed in a car wreck on the same road where Penny had been killed. This high school has not been the same since. During ball games, certain doors will be locked so people won't venture down the long, dark hallways. If for some reason someone needs to go down a dark spot in the school, that person is cautioned not to go alone. Not only the unfortunate ones who have seen Penny have died, others have too. Since Penny's death, there's been at least 2 people in every class who've been killed in a car accident. I, for one, have never seen Penny's spirit, and I sure don't want to. If you ever happen to be at this high school, be on the lookout for Penny. She may try to scare you, but just try not to let her get to you. If you do, you might be next in line. Ooh, God. Why did I pick 3 in the morning to read this? I have goosebumps. Oh, I'm having flashbacks to being a little kid reading it. This is from Chapter 10, Weird, Eerie, Ghostly Lights. And this is the ghostly lights in Sloan's Valley Railroad Tunnel, which, fun fact, this is very close to where my fiance grew up. And I think I've been here, actually. Sometimes there are certain happenings that make you wonder about the possibility of ghosts. I've been down in a cave in Sloan's Valley, a cave that they once called the Old Moonshiner's Cave. It was located just at the north end of Sloan's Valley Bridge. I'd stayed a little longer in the cave than I had intended. When I came out, it was beginning to get dark and it looked like it might rain. So I started down the railroad tracks toward the Sloan's Valley Tunnel. Everett Hilton was the night watchman at the tunnel, and Everett and I always passed the time of day talking to each other. When I came up to the south end of the tunnel, Everett was sitting just inside his little shanty there. When I started to pass by, he yelled out, "Hey, where are you going?" I answered, "I'm going to Burnside. Are there any trains due to come by soon?" He told me that there were none any closer than Somerset and Alpine. I then asked him if he had ever heard of the immigrant train wreck in the Sloan's Valley Tunnel. He said, "Yes, many a time. What do you know about it?" I told him that at the time my grandfather owned a restaurant just above the railroad tracks here in Burnside. My grandfather told me later that on that particular day, the immigrant train stopped and some people got off the train and went in to get food and eat. When they all got finished, they went back to the train. All the people on the train got off, all except the immigrants who were on it. I guess they didn't have enough money to spend at the restaurant because they spent most of their money coming to America. My grandfather said that when the train pulled out, a strange feeling came over him. He just looked at those immigrants on the train, and he had a feeling of dread. When the train pulled out, it went up the grade and then vanished. Now this is what happened. At that time, Alpine was called Summit. That was the place where fast trains passed each other. On this particular day, there was a northbound passenger train that pulled in the Summit. The train crew got off and went to telegraph the office for orders. The operator already had their orders written out. He handed them to the conductor. The conductor glanced at them and handed them up to the engineer with the remark, "Well, we'll go to Somerset for number 1. So the engineer started the train, and they went off down through Sloan's Valley. In the meantime, the train full of immigrants climbed a hill and had just passed Roadmore Cut and was making up for time on the downgrade toward the Sloan's Valley Tunnel. The 2 trains met with a terrific crash right in the middle of the tunnel. The wooden cars immediately caught on fire. Because there's so many people in the immigrant cars whose names were not known, the number of people it killed in the wreck was never officially confirmed. Over the years, the section hands of other railroad employees began to notice something particular about the Sloan's Valley Tunnel. I might mention that this tunnel was about 1,000 feet long and it was as straight as a rifle barrel. However, at each end, there was a curve. Because of the curve, you couldn't see very well beyond the tunnel going either north or south. Well, back to me and Everett. On this particular night, we sat there and discussed the train wreck for quite a while. Finally, he said, "Well, you better get going through the tunnel. The rock is still falling where the wreck happened 50 years ago." So I finally took off. I didn't have anything on me but a flashlight and a few candles I had used down in the cave. I started through the tunnel, thinking about all the people that had been killed in the wreck. Just as I started, Everett called out to me, and I went back to see what he wanted. He said, "Did you see something there in the tunnel?" I told him I didn't see a thing. He said, "It looked like a man walking." I turned on my flashlight and started again toward the tunnel. When I got to the tunnel and got a little ways into it, it seemed as if I heard someone calling. I yelled back, "Everett, did you holler at me?" He said, "No, but you better hurry. That train that was in Somerset when we started talking is coming through Burnside right now." I responded, "Yes, I better hurry." So I started out walking pretty fast. About 2/3 the way through the tunnel, I could feel a cold breeze on the back of my neck, just as though a train were entering the tunnel. I turned around and looked, but there was nothing in sight. I hurried along, and then all of a sudden I could hear wheels clicking on the rail joints. Then it started getting closer and closer and closer. All of a sudden I heard what sounded like a low, mournful whistle way off in the distance. So I imagined that what I was hearing was a train coming down Rodamore Cut. I began to hurry up again and decided to look behind me. When I did, I saw what looked like the reflection of headlights at the south end of the tunnel. I thought to myself, scared half to death, here I am in this tunnel and there's 2 trains coming, one northbound and one southbound. Well, I suddenly started trotting, but the more I trotted, the longer the tunnel seemed to get. Suddenly, I could see train lights coming at the north end of the tunnel, and I could feel a hot breath of air or something. It couldn't have been a natural breeze. Then something rushed by me and the rails were clicking. Suddenly, I heard a loud, devastating explosion in the tunnel, but when I looked around the tunnel, it was completely clear. The lights were gone, and I stepped out in the cool, fresh night air at the north end of the tunnel. From that point on, I've always believed that I saw the ghost train lights and heard the sounds of the ghost of the people who died in that awful train wreck. Jim Rabbit's Woods. In 1965, our family moved from Murray, Kentucky to the Rich Pond community here in Warren County. Soon, my brother and I began wandering around and soon learned some stories concerning our new surroundings. One of the stories that comes to mind is about Jim Rabbit's Woods. "The woods is haunted," says a man who is now in his 89th year. "I just never go near a place. It's scary." My question was, who is Jim Rabbit? Being curious as most boys are, we visited the woods quite frequently. It became part of our young lives. I'll never forget the summer when our cousin from California visited. We decided to camp in the woods one weekend, trying to arouse some spirits, but to no avail. We made sure that the campfire was kept burning to ward off any wandering animals, not because we were afraid, of course. If we had been afraid, we would not have been there to begin with. I suppose that we still couldn't help but wonder about the situation we could be putting ourselves in. We finally drifted off to sleep after staying awake over half the night. Something seemed not to be quite right about the whole affair. My dog, Brownie, would not go near the woods. She would stop, hold her nose in the air, sniffing and whining as if she could sense something we couldn't. Still, we never saw anything. The remains of an old 2-room house was still present, although it had been destroyed by a fire several years earlier. An old iron bedstead was still standing, covered with a thick overgrowth of weeds. Many other reminders of Jim Rabbit, the one-time inhabitant, were still present. I'm talking about bottles, jars, rusty pots and pans, the remains of a pot-belly stove near a cellar covered with blackberry briars. I've always been drawn to that place, going out there and sitting from time to time, thinking about the man who once occupied the house. I was also drawn to another place nearby. It was an old, overgrown cemetery. I used to ride my bike to this old, neglected churchyard cemetery to read the inscriptions on the old stones. At the time, I did not know that the old house and the old graveyard were connected. Some 30 years later, I discovered that Jim Rabbit himself was buried in that graveyard in an unmarked grave. After searching for information on this mysterious man, I found out his real name was James Arthur Moore. He was born in 1887 there in Rich Pond to George W. Moore and Fanny Foster. It's said that Jim Rabbit sold bootleg moonshine and was often seen sitting at the L&N Railroad crossing at night, peddling his whiskey during the Prohibition between 1920 and 1933. One local resident stated he would always be sitting around at the railroad crossing and would warn us of his presence because he didn't want to frighten us as we walked by. He would just say, "It's me." He also did handiwork for the community for extra money. Trains often stopped near the Jim Rabbit Woods. The tracks ran alongside Jim's place and it made it convenient to board there. Jim would go to Bowling Green in the morning hours, then would be seen coming back on that afternoon freight train. It's said that he paid the engineers with a bottle of his finest. I eventually learned that Jim had been committed to an insane asylum by a group of men there in the community in the mid to late 1940s. It was so sad when he was sent away, said another local resident. The men did not want an old black man wandering around the neighborhood, although Jim was actually harmless. Really, the rest of the community folk didn't appreciate those men's actions. James Arthur Moore, or Jim Rabbit as he was called, died May 9th, 1953, and was buried in this old local church cemetery. It's been reported that his spirit has been seen walking around the railroad tracks near Rich Pond, usually around dusk or at night, carrying a burlap bag that makes a rattling noise as if it's full of glass bottles. According to an elderly woman, from time to time you can hear bottles rattling in the dark down near the railroad tracks. It's an odd, lonely sound, fading as if someone's walking away. Jim Rabbit may be gone, but I suppose he'll always be close by, with his whiskey bottles in hand. Spirit returns to reenact death. These two friends of mine from Louisville got married and moved to Lexington. They bought an old house there and proceeded to renovate the old structure. When they got the house finished, they called to ask me if I'd like to come to Lexington and be their first overnight guest in their newly renovated house. I was truly thrilled, and I told them I would come. The very next Saturday night, I drove to Lexington to be with my friends. We had dinner and then just started talking away until about 11 p.m. It was then that the fellow said, "Well, I can see that we're all getting tired. Let's go ahead and go to bed." He then said to me, "We sleep downstairs. Your room will be the first room to the left at the top of the stairs." Well, I went up to my room, and since there's no one else up there but me, I didn't close the door when I walked into my room. I flipped on the light switch, then went over to put on my night clothes, turned back the covers on the bed, and then walked over and turned the lights out and just hopped in the bed. Just as soon as I was lying down in bed, I heard this noise out in the hallway. Squeak! Squeak! That's verbatim. I'm sorry. I can't do impressions. I might edit in a sound. I apologize. I raised up in bed, looked out in the hallway, and would you believe it? The rocking chair was rocking on its own accord. It was moving back, then forth, back, then forth. I could see it was moving because the light from the street was shining through the window, but no one was in the chair. There was no wind coming from the outside, for the doors and windows were all closed. Then the rocking stopped, and I heard footsteps come into my room. And you never heard such loud, painful breathing in all your life. Then, whatever it was put its hand on the mattress there at the foot of the bed, my bed, and mashed down. I could feel the pressure on the mattress and the breathing. You've never heard anything like it. I was scared to death. Then, whatever it was walked on around and stood at the side of the bed, then bent over the bed, still breathing that awful breathing sound. Then it put its hands on the mattress there at the side of the bed. And would you believe my body rolled into the cavity created in the mattress? My first thought was to get up out of that hole and get on the other side of the bed. So I crawled out of the hole and got on the other side of the bed. Then it walked around and stood between the wall and the head of my bed, and then I heard it breathing again as it bent over the bed. I chickened out. I turned over on my stomach, put a pillow over my head, and pulled the bed covers over my whole body. Just as I did this, I felt a very sharp stab right between my shoulder blades, just like a knife had stabbed me. I was scared to death, and I said, "My God, it's gonna kill me right here." Then I felt 2 more stabs right between the shoulder blades. I just knew it. It was gonna kill me. But suddenly I heard the footsteps leaving the room and the breathing was much less pronounced. It wasn't long until I heard the rocking chair once again rocking out there in the hallway. I was so relieved that I was still alive that I didn't even call out to my friends downstairs. The next morning I went downstairs and I said to my friend, "I want to know what in the world I experienced last night. Who was it that tried to kill me? What was that thing?" The fellow responded, "What in the world are you talking about? We don't know. You're our first overnight guest we've had in this house." I told them what I experienced up in that room, and, well, that morning my friend went down to whatever office you find out about possible homicides in an old house, and came back 2 hours later and said to me, "Guess what? 50 years ago, a man's body was found in the closet under the stairway leading upstairs. And guess how he died? He was stabbed 3 times between the shoulder blades." Well, I guess I must have experienced how that man was killed, felt the pain he would have felt being stabbed to death. This is not a made-up story. It was very real, and I felt that pain. The Bloody Dishes. My great aunt lived in a very old house. One day, one of her sisters came to see her, and they started talking. They had a snack, and then the sister was going to do dishes, but my great aunt told her, "Don't do the dishes now, because when you get up in the morning, we're just going to have to do them all over again." So she let the dishes go, went to the garden to get some potatoes for breakfast the next morning. They brought the potatoes in and peeled them. By now, it was 10 o'clock, so they went to bed. In the middle of the night, the 2 women woke up and began to talk again, when all of a sudden they heard the sounds of dishes falling and potatoes rolling around the kitchen. My great aunt was used to this, but my sister said, "I bet we'll have dishes to wash and potatoes to pick up in the morning." My great aunt said, "No, they'll be just where they were before we went to bed." When they got up in the morning, everything was in its place, but the dishes were all to be washed and the top had been taken off the milk and butter. The reason for this was because they were all covered with blood. The mystery of it all was that an African American boy had been killed in this house, and the prints of his face and hands were still on the wall that they had placed the dish cabinet over. That was the cause of all the commotion. I know most of these stories are from like the 90s, the 80s. But, like, they're just sad, man. They're just sad. Oh, boy. Hopefully that spirit can be put to rest. I hope. Roommate's death on campus. There were these 2 girls who were roommates on campus here, and one night the college was having a campus-wide dance. So the two girls decided to go to the dance, as they thought it would be a good way to meet some good-looking male hunks. So when they got to the dance, they were dancing and having a good time. Then one of the girls got sick, and she decided to go back to the dorm. However, to get to the dorm where she was, she had to go through a small patch of woods. And there was a rumor that a man had escaped from an insane asylum close by. Of course, what episode of Supernatural is this? Well, she got to thinking about this and got afraid to go through the woods alone. She felt really bad, but didn't want her roommate to miss out on the fun. So she told her she was going to go back to the dorm alone. On her way through the clump of woods, she heard heavy breathing sounds coming from behind her, but she didn't want to turn around and look back, as she was afraid that she would let them know that she had heard them, or whatever it was out there. So she began walking a bit faster, but the heavy breathing began to get louder and louder. Well, she took off running, and I mean running as hard as she could to get through the woods. She got to her dorm safely, but she could still hear the heavy breathing there behind her. She ran into the dorm and got up the stairs, then down the hallway and up to her room, but she heard the panting right behind her still. She ran into the room, slammed the door behind her and locked it. Suddenly, she heard the doorknob turning. She looked at it in perfect horror, and sure enough, it was turning. So she ran into the closet and closed the door behind her. She then heard the door to her room opening, but did not peep out to see who had came in the room. While she was hidden there in the closet, she heard a scraping noise outside her closet door, and the heavy breathing that she heard was awful to listen to. The girl finally began to scream for help, and a dorm counselor who was on duty came running upstairs. The counselor found the girl's roommate outside the closet door with her throat slit. The dead girl had been afraid that her roommate would come in contact with the man from the insane asylum, and had followed her all the way back to the dorm. Trouble is, she was the one who was found by the man. Ooh. Do I believe that story? No, I don't. This is going to be my last story because I'm a very asthmatic person and I'm out of breath. But it is from the second book, Haunted Houses and Family Ghosts of Kentucky, and it takes place in Pendleton County, which is where my fiance got her first job when we moved. Or her first professional level job when we moved. So kind of a connection to this story. I could have driven by this place again. I'm very interested in stuff that's close to me, so you all might not find this interesting, but here we are. A final goodbye. My grandmother's death was still very vivid for us, as it had only been a few months since we lost her. My mother had tried to make it to the hospital in time to see her one last time, but grandmother could not hold out that long. I believe Mom was dealing with some regrets because of this, but I do not mean to say that my grandmother and my mom were not close. I feel that Mom just felt that she had left some things unsaid, as we all do when we lose someone fairly suddenly. Whether it was longing for Grandma because of what I just mentioned, or whether it was something else, I just don't know. I do know that my mother is not one to believe in ghosts, but she cannot explain what happened in any other way. My parents used a working wood stove in their house to supplement the heat that the furnace provided. The stove had an ash pan that my mother emptied at the edge of the garden that was located just a few feet from the side of their house. This is what she was doing on the evening I'm describing, and it was just a short time after Grandma's death. There was no breeze blowing, and no lights were reflecting from the road that ran past the house. But at that moment, my mother dumped the ashes. She saw a formless, shadowy white something fly over her head. At the same moment, she distinctly felt the presence of her mother, whatever it was just doesn't explain Mom's feeling of grandmother being so near to her. Alrighty, that is all I have for today. Come back next week. Like I said at the very beginning, we're going to be talking about the haunted Boone Tavern in Berea, Kentucky. I'm actually going to go spend the night there later this year. So hopefully this is a prelude to something cool that'll come out later this year. Who knows? But with that, I hope you all enjoyed. If you're still listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, please give me a 5-star rating. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Share this with your friends if they like spooky stuff, especially if they're from Kentucky. And with that, don't forget to join us next week as we take a look at things from the other side.